Hello and welcome to the state of Kentucky. I'm Bruce Maples, publisher of Forward Kentucky, and we're glad to have you here today. We've got an interesting show for you, I think, and we're looking forward to you commenting in the stream if you would, and we'll share those comments along the way. I want to talk to you first about a concept. There's a concept out there called the levels of ignorance. You can find it if you go search for it with the Google machine. But one of the levels of ignorance is not knowing that you don't know. And then the next level is knowing you don't know something, but not knowing where to find out anything about it. So as a white male, I have spent a lot of my life in that level of ignorance of not knowing that I don't know. Spent a long time just going through life, assuming that my life and everybody else's lives were the same. Over the last so many years, that's begun changing. And when I was a young person, we would have called it consciousness raising. Nowadays, it's called being woke. I can't claim to be fully woke, but at least I'm aware that I'm waking. So maybe that's a good thing. But today we've got two people to join us. And I want to hear their voices. And I want them to explain to us what their lives are like and what it's like being a Black person in Kentucky. So we've got two young voices to join us today. And before they get offended that I called them young, they have to understand that at my age, anybody under 50 is young. So we're glad to have with us Denise Gray and Corbin Snardon. Welcome, both of you, to the state of Kentucky.
Hello, thank you. I appreciate being here. Yes.
Good to have you both. I've known something about both of you politically. Denise ran for office a few years ago. Corbin is running for office right now in House District 3 in West Kentucky. But I know there's more to the two of you than just your political activity. So let's hear a little bit more about you. Denise, why don't you start?
Well, sure. Well, I'm Denise Gray, who was born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky. I can tell you that I went to high school at Bryan Station High School. I was a cheerleader at the University of Louisville. I helped found the all-girl national champion cheer squad that we have there at the great University of Louisville.
Wow.
Yes. After graduating from U of L, I went off to the University of Denver, Stern College of Law. Came back home due to illness and found myself working with Fayette County Public Schools. And that's where I found my passion. It was my students. I saw that they needed someone that looked like them, that was in our community, that was making a difference, someone that they could look up to. And that's how they forced me. I'm calling my students when I found a fourth grade or a third grade student in the library crying about how she couldn't do and be anything in life because her mother was from South America, because she's poor, because she's a girl. And I was like, well, my mom's from South America. I'm a girl and I'm definitely not wealthy. I'm an educator. Hello. I was like, you can do anything, you can be anything, you can excel. And that's when I was like, well, they need to stop being told this same story that you can go and do all things. You need to see it in order to believe it sometimes. So that's what made me step out and become more of a community leader, so that children that look like me can see what's possible for them.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Corbin, what about you?
Yeah, so love the fact that, Denise is an educator. I am as well. So I graduated.
I'm no longer an educator, though, but I guess once an educator, always. Now I work for the state government, helping early childhood education excel so that we can have universal preschool.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So born and raised in Todd County, Kentucky, went to Western Kentucky University. And when I graduated from there, so I realized, I'm pretty young. I do fall in that young category. But I graduated in 2011, and I moved out to Western Kentucky in Paducah. And I've been in education ever since in the city of Paducah. Where I've now kind of worked myself up the ranks into administration. But, I echo some of the same comments that Denise made. I'm in education because I saw that there was not too many people that look like me. And, you know, every day I'm trying to be a good example and a community leader for those Black and brown kids that look just like me, to have an opportunity to see an example of what you can do. You know, we're living in a society where positive images, especially of Black males, is not being seen. You know, we're seeing a lot of negativity. And of course, everything that's going on in the news makes it very difficult, you know, to find those positive images and to find those reinforcing images. And so, you know, I've been in the classroom, you know, been nominated for as a finalist for Kentucky Teacher of the Year in 2016. But even beyond that, I have also been very active in my community as an advocate and pushing for those things that we need.
So one of the reasons that I really wanted to have the two of you on here is exactly what you've outlined, which is that one of you grew up and is from Lexington. And so you have that sort of urban experience. And the one is from West Kentucky and Todd County and Paducah, and more of a not rural, but certainly not Lexington or Louisville experience. So tell us what it was like, Corbin, growing up in that part of the state as a Black person.
Well, sometimes it can be very lonely. You know, I can say that I did have a decent childhood, that, you know, I had a very good childhood, but I can't lie and say that I didn't experience instances of racism, or that I didn't experience isolation and ostracizing, simply because, you know, there are so few Black Americans in rural America. You know, nothing against, you know, urban centers like Louisville or Lexington or, you know, other cities across the country, but, you know, for Black and rural America, it's a very different experience. You know, you oftentimes have to find yourself being a little bit more attentive to things. The racism is a little bit more overt instead of covert. So, you know, you have to really kind of pay attention to the things that go on there. Now, again, my experience, I did have, you know, a fairly good upbringing. However, you know, I can't deny that there are some significant barriers and challenges and systemic racism barriers, especially in rural America.
I want to get back to Denise before we leave you, Corbin. You know, middle school kids and high school kids can be amazingly cruel sometimes. So what would be an example? You said it's more overt racism. Without trying to dredge up painful memories, can you share one thing that happened during your school years that is an example of that?
Yeah, so actually, I will say that when I grew up, we had I don't know any other way to coin the term other than to say kind of like a mini race war when I was in middle school or early high school. There was an incident between a Black man and a white man that ended up with lives being lost on either side, and both parties being taken out from that. And of course, kids watch that and see that and internalize that. And so everybody, I remember for a couple of years in middle school and a little bit in high school, that everybody like picked their sides. And so, you know, when there's only so many, maybe 10% of your school population is African American, and you walk in and you see kids blatantly wearing shirts with Confederate flags, you know, it kind of sends a unique message. And, you know, even in Western Kentucky to this day, you know, when I first moved out into this area, I won't name the city or won't name the town or anything associated with it, but I was specifically told, like, hey, you can't go here after a certain time. You know, you can't be here after dark. It's really not a safe environment. And so, you know, these are things that kids are having to deal with now. These are things that I had to deal with when I was a child, which, I mean, it wasn't terribly long ago. But seeing those kinds of things, you know, it really brings out a stark contrast that, you know, you feel outnumbered.
Again, as I said at the beginning, just this whole experience was outside of my thinking and my, you know, awareness for a long time. And it was not until some years ago that I heard the term sundown town. And that's what you're describing. And so we have even now we have sundown towns in Kentucky.
Yes, you do. Yes, we do. But I know this is not a question, but that reminds me of going to Corbin, Kentucky. Last year, I guess, celebrated its 100th anniversary of the incident in which all Black people were kicked out of their town. It then became a sundown town. And there's still remnants of that today, because I went there in October not knowing of the history there. I just noticed that there I was, this dark skin, chocolatey skin, locks, and wearing female, and I was wearing bright, of course, orange or yellow at the time. And I looked around downtown as I'm walking around being myself and speaking to everyone, and I noticed they weren't speaking back. And then I looked, I was like, wait a second, why didn't they say hi back to me? And then I looked around and I saw there was no one on the street of color. There were no one in the stores of color. There was no one at the Kroger of color. And I was wondering why they were looking at me in that manner, like, what are you doing here? It was getting dark there. It was the thought was, why are you here? You need to leave. And I felt that energy that was there. But the great thing is, last night in that same town, Corbin, they had a protest about how much Black Lives Matter. And that right there is speaking of the change that is taking place here today. And that is just so powerful. It brings me so much joy that even in Corbin, that has a long history of race issues, of exclusion, that now they're becoming more open and more and willing to talk about their past and putting it out there. And that's great to hear.
We have a story up on the site about protests around the state and rallies around the state. And I have to say, when I was pulling that together, I was a little shocked at some of the sounds.
Happy tears over here for that one. That's happy tears. That is growth. That's growth. When you know. Well, so we got to embrace every single bit of growth that we get. I'm here for it. I'm going to celebrate everything.
So Denise, tell us a little bit about your experience as an urban Black person.
My experience was very different. Grew up in Lexington. I went to an elementary school called Northern Elementary School. A lot of African American students there that came from a neighborhood we came from, I believe, you all wouldn't know, Green Acres and my area. And, you know, I saw kids that looked like me. I saw things. That, you know, I saw people that looked like me. I had at least two, saw two African American teachers in my school at least. And then going through, we didn't even acknowledge the issues. I graduated from Bryan Station High School, and we were a family. If you picked on one, you picked on us all. Mm-hmm. And if you called one person, because don't get me wrong, there were racial issues, but it was quickly put a stamp on. We put it out quickly. So I didn't really have that kind of issues here in Lexington for the most part, but of course there were always issues somewhere. Because Bryan Station is on the north side of Lexington. North side of Lexington is predominantly African American. Okay. Even is predominantly Black. It still is. You speak with some people on the school board, I've heard mention that's where the Black people live. And we're everywhere in Lexington, just so you know. Maybe previously that's how it was, but now we're everywhere, y'all. Right.
We have a couple of comments I just want to share quickly. Here's one from Joni Prentice. I would bet that there's a lot of people in Kentucky that don't know some of this history. So this is good that people can learn about it. And then Jason Cooper said it's very encouraging to see these protests. As Denise said, that's some growth. But I want to get into recent things. I can't feel what you feel. I can empathize, but obviously I don't have the same background. So I want you two to tell me what the George Floyd incident, murder.
It was a murder. The Breonna murder that still we don't have an answer for. Yeah. You go first, Corbin. I'll let you go.
Well, as a Black man, you know, I agree with Denise's comment about growth and that we're seeing a lot of growth and with the protests and things that are coming here. Unfortunately, This is not something that is new to the Black community. This is not the first time that we have been outraged. This is not the first time that we have blatantly seen police murder someone on camera or
Beat
blatantly
them down.
beat them down. There are so many other names and throughout history. I mean, for all of America's history that have done this. So the initial outrage, of course, is anger. You get angry at this. You see all this stuff. I get concerned even for my own self. I'm 6'3" with dreadlocks. I have to watch where I go. I have to watch what I say. I have to think twice about some of the places and things that I go. I'm very concerned for many of my students, as they're coming into adulthood and they're asking me questions and they're having to deal with things. One of the scariest things is when you have a kid that comes up to you and asks you how to deal with an encounter for the police. And, for the record, I'm the son of a state trooper. So, it's not that, it's not that all cops are bad, but when you see these horrible instances and you don't see that justice is being served, it makes you feel, it gives you some despair, gives you a little bit of hopelessness in there. I am very overjoyed, though, to see that many people are actually moved by this. And I think time will tell the story of if their movement is going to have any motion to it, and to make sure that we just go beyond people feeling bad and having a moment of empathy, but actually moving into some action and actually moving into some things where we actually do see some laws change, where we actually do see these men who murdered George Floyd come to justice and get a conviction. Because unfortunately for the Black community, we see all this too often, where even if the officers get indicted, that they don't get convicted, that they end up getting acquitted, and then it's a rinse and repeat cycle. So I'm hoping that in this particular case, and for many to come in the future, hopefully there's no more in the future, but for this particular case, I am hoping that the officers do get brought to justice and that people will be moved to actually make meaningful change and not just be caught up in the moment.
And
what about you?
Well, I concur to all of what you said, but I think of, because the incidents actually here it's the same thing happened here in Lexington when in 1994 I was a kid. Tony Sullivan was murdered by police. There was a riot here, Bluegrass Aspendale area, and we saw it here. I saw it for myself, and then we're seeing things happening all over the country, and we're seeing that people that look like us are being murdered on video and no one having a real consequence. So whenever I see these incidents occur, because they are incidences, I think of my students. I think of my students, my Black students, because every single school that I've ever worked in was a Title I school. Where majority were receiving free and reduced lunch, because that's where I belong. Those were my people. And I saw how they were treated differently versus the white students. How they were, how their joy, how their loudness was seen as being too loud and too aggressive when they're just being themselves. And I would think to myself, if he did that out on the street and they didn't know him, he would be dead. And that's still a thought that I have regarding so many of my students. But the murder of Breonna, because we often talk about the Black males who were murdered, but we don't talk about the Black women who are we don't hear about, but it's happening. So I'm glad that everyone is like, I see this, even though it's been happening. I'm glad that people are woke for this moment. But the thing about it is that you're woke. Stay awake, and let's talk about solutions, because we're protesting. You hear us now that looting, and unfortunately looting, that we have raised our voices. But what's going to come next week? We cannot protest forever. We have to stop putting a Band-Aid on this wound and talk about it, because we're so divided with the political situation that it is. We are extremely divided to where we're not talking. And I, for one, believe that we have to have a sit down, Republicans, Democrats, white, black, Latino, gay, straight, bi, trans. We all need to sit down and talk about these issues, because we cannot continue to ignore and say that your pain is not real. That death didn't hurt that family. They're okay. They're still smiling and joking. But we're living in fear every single day, living with trauma. This trauma that we're feeling is real. It's real. And so I've been afraid. I've been afraid. I've been afraid for America. I've been afraid for my Black men who are out there who are being targeted. Afraid for my Black women who are targeted as well, and seen as being angry when they're not, when they're just hurting.
Right.
So I want you all everyone to see that hurt, that pain that we're experiencing right now, because it's real.
I saw a sign at a protest the other day. I mean, again, I keep saying this because I want to acknowledge it, that I'm who I am, and I don't live with what you live with every day. And I'm trying to continue to grow in my awareness of that. And I want in just a minute to talk about solutions. But I saw a sign at a protest that just cut me to the quick. And it was two young Black girls holding this sign that said, "When did I go from being cute to scary?" And I just looked at that, for a while and thought, wow, that's tough right there. So Corbin, you wrote an article, or you gave an article to us that we posted about things that need to happen next. And Denise, you've mentioned some things. David James from Metro Council went and spoke to the Legislative Judicial Committee yesterday, talking about no-knock warrants and about subpoena power for civil overview boards and so on and so forth. So, Corbin, let's start with you. What are some things that you would suggest to us old white people like me? What can we do to make a difference? What can we do to be an ally? What can we do to help change happen?
Well, first I would definitely say is, educate yourself on the issues. Start with some literature. Start with reading books like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
Yes.
Start by, which is a fantastic book on that. Start by, studying, going back, really not just looking at, Dr. King was a mythic figure, but actually study the movement and see why they were fighting the way that they were fighting. Read some books by Audre Lorde, read some books by Zora Neale Hurston. Start with that. And then after that, I say to everyone that really wants to be an ally, and I said this in my comments that I posted on Sunday and sent to Forward Kentucky, but put your money where your mouth is. If you really want to make a difference, and if you really want to help, you don't have to wait until we see somebody die in the streets with a knee on their neck or get served a no-knock warrant. You don't have to wait until that. You can start putting into things like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You can start donating to the Louisville Bail Fund. I'm a big supporter of having some civilian overview and police oversight for our local police departments, in the sense that, in the state of Kentucky, we can't subpoena police officers. Civilians can. And I think that that's wrong. If a police officer is breaking the law, if they're, if they are abusing the law that they're supposed to protect and serve, then there needs to be some judicial oversight on that. But, most definitely continue to donate to those funds, continue to help out those families, support African-American businesses, support African-Americans by just simply understanding you may not be able to understand how we feel. You may not be able to understand our situation, but knowing the limit of your, how do I want to say, I'm trying to find the right way to say this, knowing that even in your inability to understand where we're coming from, that sometimes just being there and being helpful is enough. If you help the best way that you can. Obviously you can never be in our shoes, but to really help these families and seek justice, and I also want to point out that, I love what Denise was mentioning about, we can't protest forever. And, these battles, we see them in the streets, but they're won in the courtrooms. So, that's where we need advocacy. We need activism for judicial reform. We need advocacy and activism from any race that has any power, for that matter, to really change the system that keeps allowing this to happen. You shouldn't have to be accidentally serving no knock warrant to the wrong house and someone shoot you up, and then all of a sudden it's like your fault because the police shot you. You know,
Yeah.
there needs to be a change in that system. And so we need our legislators, we need our congressmen, we need everybody who has any kind of power whatsoever to use their voice in whatever way they have. If your voice is small and you don't have a large reach, that's fine. You know, I encourage social media activism. I encourage, you know, again, put your money where your mouth is and find reputable funds to donate to. But, you know, if you've got a large voice and a large following and some power behind that and influence behind that, then shame on you for not using it to fight for justice. So people need to use that and advocate in these avenues.
Okay. Denise.
You made me smile with that. Thank you, Corbin. I concur with all the above. Awesome. So one issue is that we have, yes, things are won in the courtroom. However, the laws happen in Frankfurt. The laws happen in Washington, D.C. You have leaders who are making these decisions that don't look like me, don't look like you, Corbin. You have, and they could reach out to us to get our point of view on issues, but they haven't because they didn't care. And right now we're experiencing consequences of not having representation historically. And so what I can ask for people to do, a solution, is to run for office. I did, Corbin is, and we in Frankfurt, we have a lot of the employees are not of color, are not. Why is that? That's a question that we need to be asking. Why aren't the people in leadership giving African Americans a job? Why don't we have educated Black teachers in the classroom? There's teachers out there who are applying for the jobs, but they're not getting the interviews due to the site-based decision-making council, the way that it's set up. They get to decide who gets an interview, and it's not always the best qualified, let me tell you that. We have, so it starts on those many levels. Also, like you said, Corbin, put your money where your mouth is. Go support a Black-owned business. And as I had an event last night online, which was a conversation. I guess I'll speak more about that in a little bit. A gentleman said, don't just go to a Black-owned soul food restaurant. There's other avenues of Black businesses out there. Right. It is your duty to venture out, to look outside your circle and find Black people, find people who do not have the same experiences that you do. Many of the people who are like, what do we do now? You look on their Facebook pages and they don't have any Black friends, Facebook friends, and you don't actually have to know these people to be your Facebook friend. So how small is your circle? You can't get one Black, one Latino, one Asian Facebook friend. So those right there are just small steps, but running for office is a big step, I must say. Yeah. It's a major step, let me tell you, and Corbin knows, but small steps that everybody can do are just that. But I encourage everybody that you have a voice, no matter if it's small, medium, large, use it. What you think matters. And you have to make sure people who don't care about what you think, you have to make sure they start to be concerned. And so.
I have to share a story. Some years ago, a political club that I was involved with hosted a night called the 9th Street Divide. And if you know anything about Louisville, you know that 9th Street is where the traditional Black community begins, moving west out of Louisville. And so there's this thing in Louisville called the 9th Street Divide, and it's sort of a metaphor for race relations. So we had some people in to speak to this pretty much all white club about race relations in Louisville. Senator Gerald Neal, and he said something that I have never forgotten. He said, don't show up down here and tell us what you're going to do. show up down here and listen and let us tell you what we mean. And I just thought that was really a powerful moment.
Mhm.
I do have a favor to ask of the two of you, though. I have tried for, I don't know, on and off for a year or two to get some diversity into our contributors list. Right now, it's just like lily white, top to bottom. And I would really like to find some persons of color, black and brown, to contribute. So if you know of anybody who wants to do reporting or writing, send them my way, because I really would like to talk to them.
And I do, and I will.
Okay,
I
good.
will get right on that.
Send them on. Send them on. So, last question. I have one other favor to ask, and this is for all persons of color. For those of us who are not persons of color, when we do or say something that's stupid, would you please nicely point it out, because maybe we don't know? That would be helpful, I think. You know, those of us who are trying to learn.
Trust me, we pointed out.
Oh yes, we do.
Well, I'll take all the education I can get. Okay, last question, and I'll give both of you a shot at it. If you were going to say one thing to all the white people in Kentucky, what would it be? And either one of you can go first.
I'll let Denise go first.
I was waiting for you, Corey. Say the question again.
If you could say one thing to all of the white people in Kentucky, what would it be?
It would be listen.
Hmm.
Listen, what we're saying is real. It's real.
Well, I would say, first off, in definite agreement with Denise. Yes, listen. But I would also say that this is not a political issue.
Yes.
This is a people issue. This is about basic rights. This is about humanity. This is about love for people who may look different than you. It is not about red and blue. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's not about who you support on the ballot. It's about people and making sure that people are treated fairly.
Excellent. Thank you both. This has been, at least for me, it's been very valuable. I hope you have found it valuable as well. This will be available later for people to watch, and you're welcome to share it. Gray, Corbin, Snardon, thank you for your time, and thank you for being on the State of Kentucky.
Thank you for having me.